The Verican species had always considered themselves the pinnacle of evolutionary adaptation. Emerging from the caustic, high-gravity world of Veric Prime, they were convinced no other sentient beings could match their survival prowess. Their exoskeleton could withstand temperatures that would vaporize most organic life forms. Their multiple redundant organ systems laughed in the face of radiation levels that would turn other species into crispy biological footnotes. Coral Vrent, lead communication analyst for the Galactic Exploration Consortium, sat in her observation pod, mandibles clicking with a mixture of boredom and superiority. Another standard cycle of scanning interstellar frequencies, another cycle of finding precisely nothing interesting. The vast communication arrays stretched out before her, a testament to Verican technological supremacy. Incoming transmission droned the ship's communication system. Unknown frequency. Non-standard communication protocol detected. Coral's secondary sensory tendrils perked up. Non-standard usually meant primitive, which meant entertaining. She loved nothing more than picking apart the communications of less advanced species. The transmission crackled to life. At first, it seemed like complete nonsense. ... And then I said to my buddy, "Hold my beer, I am going to try something stupid." Coral blinked her 4 compound eyes in rapid succession. What kind of meaningless gibberish was this? The transmission continued, a cacophony of loud noises, laughter, and what seemed to be deliberate descriptions of increasingly dangerous activities. Preliminary analysis suggests a communication from a pre-industrial civilization, announced her junior colleague, Mira Sholin. Her voice carried the unmistakable tone of someone about to enjoy some prime mockery. Coral leaned closer to the communication display, her exoskeleton creaking with anticipation. "Play it again," she commanded. The transmission repeated. Fragments of conversation emerged. ... Jumped my truck over the creek. ... Broke my arm. But totally worth it. ... That you can't climb that. The Vericans erupted into collective laughter. Not the kind of laughter that suggested humor, but the kind that suggested complete and utter derision. These beings, Coral announced to the entire communication deck, are clearly unsuited for survival. They speak of intentionally pursuing dangerous activities. They celebrate failure. They seem to have a communication protocol that celebrates stupidity. Mira pulled up visual data that had accompanied the transmission. Blurry images showed bipedal creatures engaging in what could only be described as monumentally ill-advised activities. One image depicted a creature balancing precariously on a small board, moving down a steep incline. Another showed a group of these beings lifting heavy objects and then dropping them on themselves. They call this extreme sports Mira read from the translation matrix. Apparently it's a form of voluntary danger engagement. The entire Verican crew burst into another round of dismissive laughter. Voluntary danger? Celebrating potential self-destruction? These creatures were clearly the universe's joke. Little did they know, they had just intercepted their first human communication. Little did they understand that what they saw as stupidity was actually something far more complex: human innovation, creativity, and an incomprehensible ability to survive and thrive in circumstances that would obliterate most species. Captain Renz Tollback, reviewing the transmission, made an official log entry that would become legendary in Verican historical archives: discovered primitive species. Communication suggests complete biological unsuitability for advanced survival. Recommend minimal further investigation. If only they knew. The universe has a remarkable sense of humor, and the Vericans were about to become its primary punchline. 3 solar cycles after their mockery of the human transmissions, the Verican exploration vessel Razor Spine drifted into an unremarkable star system. Captain Renz Tollback was midway through his standard "Why are we even here?" morning briefing when the ship's junior navigation officer, Lyra Ken, interrupted with the kind of excitement typically reserved for discovering a new method of molecular deconstruction. "Sir, we're detecting a populated planetary body," Lyra announced, her voice crackling with an energy that made Coral Vrent's sensory tendrils twitch with irritation. Coral had been nursing her 3rd caffeine equivalent and was in no mood for interruptions. Populated how? Another collection of primitive radio signals about holding beer and doing stupid things. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a planet that looked distressingly normal. No toxic atmosphere, no radiation storms, no crystalline death landscapes. Just green and blue and white, the most boring color combination in the known galaxy. Scanning for technological indicators, Mira Sholin reported, her translation matrix already working overtime. What they found defied every expectation the Vericans had carefully constructed. The human colony wasn't just surviving. It was thriving in a way that made absolutely no logical sense. Take, for instance, their living structures. Instead of the perfectly engineered, radiation-proof, gravity-resistant habitats the Vericans considered standard, these humans lived in wood and metal constructions. Wood, a material so fundamentally weak that a Verican child could crush it with a single appendage. They're building settlements in areas with potential natural disasters, Captain Tolbach muttered, reviewing the initial scan data. Tornado zones, floodplains, earthquake regions. It's like they're deliberately choosing the most catastrophically dangerous locations possible. Coral leaned closer to the view screen, her multiple eyes focusing and refocusing. Humans were walking around outside without any protective exoskeletons. No radiation shields, no atmospheric filters. Clothing. Thin layers of fabric that looked about as protective as a soap bubble. A group of human children caught her attention. They were engaged in what could only be described as a controlled chaos ritual. Some were climbing trees, with a recklessness that suggested complete disregard for gravity, physics, or personal safety. Others were riding small-wheeled contraptions that seemed designed for maximum potential injury. Are they training their offspring to be as inefficient as possible? Mira wondered aloud. But it was what happened next that truly broke the Verican understanding of survival. A massive piece of earth-moving equipment, which they would later learn was called a backhoe, suddenly malfunctioned. Most species would evacuate. Most would initiate emergency protocols. The humans? A group simply walked up to the smoking machine, looked at it, and started laughing. One human wearing something called a plaid shirt that looked like a visual assault on sensibility actually climbed into the broken machine. Minutes later, not only had he fixed it, but he was using it to dig an even larger hole than originally intended. This, Coral announced to no one in particular, makes absolutely no sense. Captain Tolbach's communication log from that day would become a classic of unintentional comedy in Verican scientific archives. Discovered advanced terrestrial species. Survival methods completely incomprehensible. Recommendation: extensive study required to understand how they have not yet accidentally eliminated themselves. What the Vericans didn't know was that they had just witnessed a typical Tuesday on a human colony world. What seemed like miraculous survival was simply Tuesday. A nearby human settlement was hosting what they called a county fair. To the Vericans, it looked like a celebration of potential self-destruction. Giant spinning machines that seemed designed to induce maximum disorientation. Structures that defied every known principle of structural engineering. People consuming foods that looked more like chemical warfare than nutrition. Is that? Are they eating something called a deep-fried butter stick? Mira asked, her translation matrix struggling to process the concept. Coral could only stare. The humans weren't just surviving. They were doing it with a level of enthusiasm that bordered on the maniacal. One human, later identified as Jack Reeves, noticed the Verican observation craft. Instead of panic, instead of fear, he did something that would become legendary in their first contact report. He waved, and then he grinned. A grin that said, quite clearly, "Hold my beer. I've got this." The Vericans had no idea what was coming. First contact was nothing like the diplomatic training simulations. Nothing. At all. The Verican delegation arrived expecting a carefully choreographed exchange of scientific protocols and galactic etiquette. What they got was Jack Reeves, local colony maintenance supervisor, who greeted them with a hearty "Well, would you look at that?" and a laugh that seemed to challenge the very laws of physics. Their communication began with what the Vericans assumed would be a standard protocols exchange. Coral Vrent, lead communication analyst, had prepared her most formal linguistic algorithms. She had practiced precise, measured responses that would demonstrate Verican intellectual superiority. Jack had other plans. So he said, chewing something called beef jerky, a food product that looked like it had been deliberately designed to test the limits of digestive systems. "You guys are aliens, huh?" Mira Sholin's translation matrix worked overtime. The phrase "you guys" did not compute. Were they a collective, a singular entity. The grammatical ambiguity was maddening. "We are the Verican Exploratory Mission," Coral responded, each syllable carefully enunciated. "We represent the most advanced Death World adaptation species in the known galaxy." Jack took another bite of beef jerky. "Cool. Want a beer?" The word beer sent the Verican communication team into temporary paralysis. Their initial scans of human transmissions had suggested beer was some form of voluntary poisoning ritual. Surely he couldn't be seriously offering them a substance that appeared to lower cognitive function and increase probability of injury. "We do not consume liquid intoxicants," Coral replied primly. Jack's response was to laugh, not a polite chuckle, not a measured social response, but a full-bodied, universe-challenging laugh that suggested the mere concept of not drinking beer was the funniest thing he had ever encountered. The human colony itself was a masterclass in contradictions. They had advanced computational systems alongside mechanical tools that looked like they belonged in a prehistoric museum. Their medical facilities could perform microsurgery with laser precision, and then right next door would be a workshop where humans fixed complex machinery using what appeared to be nothing more than determination, duct tape, and an alarming amount of caffeine. "How do you survive?" Mira asked, genuinely bewildered, watching a group of humans attempting to move a massive piece of equipment using what seemed like pure willpower and questionable physics. Jack grinned. "We're adaptable." An understatement so massive it could have colonized its own solar system. The Vericans discovered humans had entire cultural practices dedicated to intentionally putting themselves in dangerous situations. Extreme sports, they called them. Activities that seemed designed to test the very limits of biological survival. Rock climbing, skydiving, volcano boarding, shark diving. Each activity was like a deliberate middle finger to the concept of self-preservation. "You intentionally jumped from moving aircraft?" Captain Tolbach asked, reviewing footage of skydiving, his multiple eyes blinking in rapid, disbelieving succession. "Yep," came the cheerful response from a local human instructor. "Totally awesome." Awesome was another linguistic concept that defied Verican translation. It seemed to simultaneously mean terrifying, exciting, and potentially fatal, often all at the same time. Their recreational activities were equally confusing. Humans played something called rugby, a sport that appeared to be organized physical combat with only the loosest of rules. They consumed hot sauce that seemed designed to cause physical pain. They watched horror movies that deliberately induced terror. "We do this for fun?" Mira asked, watching a group of humans willingly consume a sauce that made them cry, sweat, and laugh simultaneously. Jack took another bite of his jerky. Beats sitting around doing nothing. The Vericans were beginning to understand that fun for humans was essentially a synonym for controlled chaos. But it was their approach to problem-solving that truly broke every Verican computational model. Humans didn't just solve problems. They attacked them with a combination of creativity, stubborn determination, and what could only be described as weaponized optimism. A complex machinery malfunction that would take Verican engineers weeks of careful analysis. Humans would have it fixed in hours, using methods that violated every known engineering principle, powered by coffee and an inexplicable belief that they could, in fact, solve anything. How Captain Tolbach demanded, watching a human repair a complex cooling system using what appeared to be a paperclip, chewing gum, and sheer force of will, do you consistently defy every known law of probability? Jack just winked. "We're special." The Vericans were rapidly discovering that special was perhaps the most understated description possible for the human species. Captain Wren's Tolbach was not a being who appreciated uncertainty. The Verican leadership prided themselves on mathematical precision, calculated risks, and absolute predictability. Humans, with their chaotic approach to existence, were an affront to everything he believed about survival. "We need empirical evidence," he announced during an emergency council meeting aboard the Razor Spine. "These humans cannot be as adaptable as they appear. We will design a challenge that will definitively prove their biological limitations." Coral Vrent and Mira Sholin exchanged a look that suggested they were either about to witness something monumentally scientific or monumentally stupid. With Tolbach, it was often difficult to distinguish between the two. The challenge was meticulously designed. A simulated survival scenario that incorporated every extreme environmental condition the Vericans could imagine. they would drop a human team into a controlled environment that combined extreme temperature variations, high gravity terrain, toxic atmospheric conditions, limited resource availability, and predictable environmental hazards. Jack Reeves listened to the challenge parameters with the kind of enthusiasm most beings reserved for winning lottery tickets. "Sounds fun," he declared, which was not the response the Vericans had anticipated. The test zone was a marvel of technological engineering, a massive enclosed environment that could simulate everything from Arctic tundra to volcanic wasteland in moments. Verican scientists had spent months creating the most unforgiving survival scenario possible. They selected a team of 4 humans: Jack Reeves, a colony maintenance supervisor Elena Rodriguez, a former military emergency response specialist Marcus Williams, a wilderness survival instructor, and Dana Chen, a geological engineer. The humans were given minimal equipment. Basic survival gear. A few tools. Nothing that would give them an unfair advantage. The Vericans watched through multiple observation points, their multiple eyes focused with scientific intensity. Hour 1 temperature dropped to -50 degrees Celsius. Winds simulated at hurricane force. "They'll freeze within minutes," Captain Tolbach predicted confidently. Within 30 minutes, the human team had constructed a shelter using debris, their own clothing, and what appeared to be an impressive understanding of thermodynamic principles. Hour 3 gravity increased to 3 times standard planetary pressure. Most species would be crushed, immobilized. The humans? They adjusted their movement patterns, redistributed weight, and continued their survival strategies. Hour 6 toxic gas introduction. Atmospheric composition changed to something that would have killed most known sentient species instantly. Elena Rodriguez pulled out a makeshift filtration device constructed from what looked like parts of their survival kit and some cloth. Improvised gas mask, she explained to her teammates, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Hour 12 simulated earthquake. Terrain transformed into a landscape of shifting, unstable ground. Marcus Williams not only navigated the terrain but was actually taking geological samples and making observations. "Fascinating rock formation," he muttered, as if they weren't in the middle of a survival nightmare. Hour 18 limited water and food resources. Dana Chen demonstrated a water collection technique that seemed to defy known physical laws. She created a condensation trap using plastic, a piece of tubing, and what appeared to be pure scientific determination. Hour 24 complete system failure. Environmental controls went into complete randomization mode. This was the moment the Vericans had been waiting for. Total system collapse. Certain death. The human team looked at each other. Grinned. "Barbecue," Jack suggested. They actually pulled out a portable cooking device and began preparing a meal. Captain Tolbach's mandibles clicked in pure, unadulterated disbelief. The challenge was supposed to break them. Demonstrate their limitations. Prove that the humans were just another fragile species in a dangerous universe. Instead, they had turned it into what could only be described as the world's most extreme camping trip. When the simulation ended, the human team emerged. Not just survived, not just functional, but laughing, sharing jokes, comparing notes on their survival strategies. So Jack said to the stunned Verican observation team, "When do we do this again?" The Vericans had no response. Science, it seemed, had just been comprehensively schooled by human unpredictability. The Verican Scientific Analysis Council convened in their most sterile conference chamber, holographic displays flickering with data from the human survival challenge. The room buzzed with a mixture of confusion, frustration, and an emotion remarkably close to what humans might call bewilderment. Dr. Coral Vrent stood at the center of the chamber, her multiple sensory tendrils twitching with a combination of scientific excitement and professional irritation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her translation matrix rendering her words with clinical precision, "we are confronting a biological anomaly that defies every known principle of survival." The holographic displays showed frame-by-frame analysis of the human team's performance. Each moment was a testament to something the Vericans could not comprehend: adaptability that bordered on the miraculous. Take Elena Rodriguez, for instance. During the toxic gas phase of the challenge, she didn't just survive. She constructed a filtration system using materials that, by all Veric and scientific understanding, should have been completely incompatible. What a piece of cloth from her outer layer. A fragment of plastic tubing, some kind of activated charcoal substance that seemed to have been compressed into a makeshift filter. The molecular restructuring alone, Mira Sholin muttered, zooming in on the filtration device, should be impossible. But it wasn't impossible. It was Tuesday for humans. Marcus Williams presented an equally perplexing case study. During the high-gravity terrain segment, most species would have been crushed, immobilized, rendered completely non-functional. Instead, Marcus not only moved but was actively collecting geological samples, his body adapting to the increased gravitational stress with what could only be described as casual elegance. Muscle plasticity beyond any known biological model, Dr. Vrent noted, her voice a mixture of professional admiration and personal frustration. Their physiological adaptation mechanisms are extraordinary. Dana Chen's water collection technique during the resource-limited phase was another marvel. Using nothing more than a piece of plastic, some tubing, and an understanding of thermodynamics that would make most planetary engineering teams weep with joy, she created a condensation trap that produced potable water in an environment that should have been completely inhospitable. Captain Renz Tolbach, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. We designed this challenge to break them, to prove their limitations. A junior scientist named Lyra Ken spoke up, a voice carrying a hint of something dangerous curiosity. Sir, what if we've actually discovered something remarkable? What if humans represent a form of biological adaptation we've never encountered? The room fell silent. The implication was enormous. The Vericans had always considered themselves the pinnacle of evolutionary adaptation, emerging from Veric Prime, a world so caustic and high gravity that most species would be instantly vaporized. They had developed multiple redundant organ systems, exoskeletons that could withstand radiation levels that would turn other life forms into crispy biological footnotes. But these humans, they didn't just survive. They thrived. They approached survival not as a mathematical problem to be solved, but as a creative challenge to be conquered. Their approach to problem-solving, Dr. Vrent continued, is fundamentally different from any species we've encountered. They don't just analyze, they innovate. They transform limitations into opportunities. The holographic display showed Jack Reeves during the final phase of the challenge, when all environmental systems failed, when the scenario was designed to be utterly unsurvivable. He and his team didn't just survive. They started preparing a meal. A barbecue, of all things. They were facing total environmental collapse, Captain Tolbach said, and they decided to cook. Mira Sholin's translation matrix picked up something remarkable in the communication logs. Jack's exact words, might as well eat well if we're going to die. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't even defiance. It was something more profound. A fundamental belief that no matter how dire the circumstances, there was always room for human joy, for human creativity. The scientific implications were staggering. Humans weren't just a species. They were a living, breathing demonstration that survival was more than mathematical probability. It was an art form. We need to understand them, Dr. Vrent concluded. Not as a potential threat, not a species to be categorized, but as a phenomenon to be studied. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of their journey of understanding. Humans were about to teach the Vericans that the universe was far more complex, far more beautiful, and infinitely more entertaining than any of their scientific models could have predicted. The real challenge was just beginning. The invitation was extended with all the enthusiasm of a formal scientific protocol. The Verican Exploration Consortium requested, no, formally demanded, that the human survival team share their knowledge. What they got was something entirely unexpected. Jack Reeves arrived at the Verican research facility wearing what could only be described as the least scientific outfit possible: cargo shorts, a t-shirt with a cartoon depicting something called a dad joke, and a pair of boots that looked like they had survived multiple apocalypses. So he said, dropping into a chair that immediately looked like it was reconsidering its structural integrity, "You want to know how we survive?" The Verican research team had prepared a meticulously organized presentation. Holographic displays, computational models, precise algorithmic breakdowns of survival techniques. Jack pulled out a small object from his pocket. Want to see something cool? Dr. Coral Vrent's sensory tendrils twitched with a mixture of scientific curiosity and profound irritation. The something cool turned out to be a multi-tool, a device so versatile it seemed to defy the very laws of engineering. This, Jack explained, is how we solve problems. The multi-tool was a marvel of human ingenuity. In the span of 30 seconds, Jack demonstrated it could function as a knife, a screwdriver, a bottle opener, a fire starter, and most inexplicably something that could apparently fix a loose clothing button. You're telling me, Mira Sholin asked, her translation matrix working overtime, that you solve complex survival scenarios with? This, Jack grinned. Nah, this is just the beginning. What followed was less a scientific presentation and more a masterclass in human improvisation. Jack began explaining survival techniques that seemed to blend engineering, psychology, creativity, and what could only be described as weaponized optimism. Water collection. Not just about finding water, but understanding local environmental conditions. It's about reading the landscape, he explained, sketching out complex diagrams that looked like they were designed by someone who had failed art class but excelled in quantum physics. Shelter construction. It's not about having the right materials, Jack continued. It's about seeing potential in what most would consider garbage. He demonstrated a shelter design using what appeared to be a discarded piece of plastic, some cordage, a handful of branches, what looked suspiciously like duct tape. The Veric engineers were simultaneously horrified and fascinated. This wasn't engineering. This was art, survival as a creative act. Elena Rodriguez joined the presentation, bringing a military precision that contrasted beautifully with Jack's casual approach. Her segment on emergency medical techniques was a revelation. The Vericans had sophisticated medical technology. Elena showed them how humans survived when technology failed. Sometimes, she explained, demonstrating a field medical technique that involved using a shirt as a makeshift bandage. Technology is great, but knowing how to use what's around you, that's survival. Marcus Williams took over to discuss terrain adaptation. The Verican geologists had extensive computational models for navigating difficult landscapes. Marcus showed them something entirely different: how humans didn't just navigate terrain, they read it and understood it, became part of it. Geology isn't just about rocks, he said, holding up a stone and examining it with a reverence that suggested he was reading an ancient text. It's about understanding stories, the story of how this landscape was formed, how it changes, how it lives. Diana Chen's presentation on resource management was perhaps the most mind-bending. The Vericans had complex recycling and resource allocation algorithms. Dana showed them how humans turned limitations into opportunities. Scarcity, she explained, is just another word for creativity. She demonstrated a water filtration system constructed from what looked like items found in a random junk drawer. Plastic bottles, charcoal, sand, a piece of fabric that might have once been a t-shirt. We don't just survive, Jack summarized at the end of their presentation. We make survival an art form. The Verican research team was silent. Their carefully constructed models of survival, their mathematical approaches to adaptation, had just been comprehensively dismantled. Captain Renz Tollback, who had been observing silently, finally spoke. You're telling me your primary survival strategy is creativity? Jack winked. Pretty much, Unage. The universe, it seemed, had just revealed that survival was less about perfect engineering and more about the ability to look at a problem and say, hold my beer, I've got this. The Vericans were beginning to understand that humans weren't just a species. They were a force of nature. The Verican Scientific Exploration Council had one final test, a scenario so extreme, so utterly impossible, that it would definitively prove the limitations of human survival capabilities. They called it the Omega scenario. Imagine an environment that combined every possible survival nightmare. Atmospheric pressure fluctuating between near vacuum and crushing compression. Temperature ranges from absolute zero to plasma-level heat within minutes. Terrain that shifts between razor-sharp crystalline structures and liquefied ground. Radiation levels that would sterilize most known life forms. Minimal resources. Constant, unpredictable environmental disruptions. The Verican scientists were certain. This would be the ultimate proof of human biological inadequacy. They selected the same human team, Jack, Elena, Marcus, and Dana. But this time, they added a twist. The humans would be dropped into this environment with nothing but the clothes on their backs and one personal item of their choosing. Jack brought a multi-tool. Elena brought a roll of duct tape. Marcus brought a small notebook and pencil. Dana brought a bandana. Captain Renz Tollback watched through the observation screens, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. This, he announced to the entire research team, will be the moment we definitively prove human limitations. The scenario began. First came the pressure changes. Atmospheric density shifted so rapidly that most species would be torn apart at the molecular level. The human team didn't just survive, they started taking notes. Interesting pressure gradient, Marcus muttered, using his pencil to sketch something in his notebook that looked like a complex mathematical model, and an abstract art piece had a baby. When temperatures plummeted to temperatures that should have instantly frozen organic matter, Elena was already constructing a thermal trap using her duct tape, the bandana, and what appeared to be some lint from Jack's pocket. We're going to need to create a microclimate, she explained, as if discussing something as mundane as making a sandwich. The terrain transformed into a landscape of razor-sharp crystalline structures. Most species would be instantly shredded. The humans? They were walking across it like it was a slightly annoying sidewalk. Jack's multi-tool came out. He started collecting crystal samples, his movements so casual it was like he was collecting seashells on a beach rather than navigating a surface that would have turned most beings into biological confetti. Radiation levels spiked, levels that would have sterilized entire planetary ecosystems. Dana pulled out her bandana, created an improvised radiation shield that defied every known principle of particle physics, and continued collecting geological data. Fascinating mineral composition, she muttered, as if they weren't in the middle of an environment that should have killed them a dozen times over. Resource limitation kicked in. Water? Non-existent. Food? Forget it. The humans looked at each other and grinned. Barbecue Jack suggested. They actually started preparing a makeshift cooking method using the crystalline structures, some fabric, and what appeared to be pure human audacity. Captain Tollback's entire scientific worldview began to crack. The final stage involved complete environmental randomization, a scenario so chaotic that computational models predicted total system failure within moments. The human team treated it like an interesting puzzle. "Anybody want to bet on what happens next?" Jack asked, as if they were discussing the weather and not surviving in an environment that violated every known law of biological existence. When the scenario ended, the human team emerged. Not just survived, not just functional, but laughing, comparing notes. Dana was already sketching out potential research papers. "So," Jack said to the stunned Verican observation team, "when do we do this again?" The Verican Scientific Exploration Council fell into a profound, universe-shattering silence. Humans weren't just a species. They were a force of nature that hadn't yet received the memo about its own limitations. Captain Tollback's final log entry would become legendary in Verican scientific archives. Preliminary conclusion: humans do not merely survive. They weaponize survival into an art form of such complexity that our most advanced computational models cannot comprehend their fundamental approach to existence. The universe, it seemed, had just revealed its most unexpected magic trick. And its name was humanity. The debriefing room hummed with an uncomfortable silence, the kind that follows a cosmic revelation so profound it makes every previous assumption feel like a child's crayon drawing compared to a masterpiece. Coral Vrent's datapad clicked rhythmically against the conference table, her sardonic expression a mix of grudging respect and barely contained irritation. Humans, she thought, of all the unexpected variables in the universe. So Captain Renz Tollback began, his traditionally rigid posture slightly, almost imperceptibly softened. "Let's review the unexpected outcomes of our expedition." Mira Shorland leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with the kind of scientific excitement that makes seasoned explorers either cringe or reluctantly smile. "Unexpected? Sir, that's an understatement. We arrived expecting a primitive species, and instead found..." A civilization that defies every single predictive model in our database. Coral interrupted, her tone dripping with a peculiar blend of annoyance and grudging admiration. Jack Reeves, who had been quietly observing the Verican delegation, couldn't help but chuckle. Defies is a strong word. I prefer delightfully complicated. The room fell silent. Delightfully complicated. It was perhaps the most human description possible, vague, optimistic, and maddeningly imprecise. Misconceptions unraveled. Their initial assessment of humanity had been straightforward: a young species, technologically inconsistent, culturally fractured. What they discovered was something far more nuanced. Humans weren't just adaptable, they were transformative. Every system the Verican expedition had meticulously studied seemed to bend and reshape around human ingenuity. Scientific protocols, more like scientific suggestions. Cultural boundaries, more like creative guidelines waiting to be reimagined. Remember our first encounter? Mira asked, pulling up a holographic replay of their initial landing. We anticipated resistance, defensive postures, potential conflict. Jack smirked. And instead you got pizza and impromptu karaoke. Captain Tollback cleared his throat. The cultural exchange protocols were not designed for spontaneous musical performances, lessons in humility. The true revelation wasn't technological. It wasn't about advanced weaponry or complex computational systems. It was about perspective, the human capacity to look at a problem and see not just obstacles, but opportunities. Coral's datapad suddenly projected a series of collaborative research proposals, joint expeditions, shared technological developments, cultural exchange programs. Each document represented hours of negotiation, compromise, and most surprisingly genuine mutual curiosity. We came seeking to categorize, Mira reflected, and we're leaving having been categorically humbled. Jack raised an eyebrow. Sounds like a win to me. The unexpected constant. What no predictive model could have captured was the human capacity for genuine, unpredictable connection. Not just communication, but understanding. The Verican expedition had approached humanity as a problem to be solved, a species to be understood. Instead, they found partners, collaborators, equals. So Captain Tollback finally said, his voice a mixture of resignation and newfound respect, "How do we explain this to the Central Council?" Coral's laugh was sharp, unexpected. "We tell them the truth. That humanity is not what we expected. There's something far more interesting." Final observations. Humans, they discovered, were like quantum mechanics personified. The more you tried to define them, the more they defied definition. Unpredictable, chaotic, brilliantly, maddeningly alive. As the debriefing concluded, Jack offered a final, quintessentially human observation: want to grab a drink and discuss the finer points of our mutual weirdness. And surprisingly, unbelievably, they all did. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor, and humanity was its favorite punchline. Expedition log annotation submitted by lead explorer Coral Vrent, classified preliminary findings, subject human civilization, recommendation further study. Definitely. Absolutely. Without question.